Phil thought he had found the perfect wife, but their marriage turned into a trap. Gradually, he gives up hobbies, loses friends, and feels more and more like a stranger next to her. Behind the facade of the perfect couple, there are resentments and secrets. Will he find the strength to get out of this web? I always believed that married life shouldn't be this difficult, but being married to Joanna Jo was turning out to be much harder than I ever expected. The constant nagging and complaining felt relentless, as though nothing I did could ever be right. Before we got together, I had many hobbies, mostly outdoor activities, sports, cycling, and playing football. Over time, though, they slowly disappeared. Jo would say we couldn't afford the fees, didn't have the time, or she'd already made other plans for the same day. I gradually lost contact with more and more friends, missing out on trips and events. I was so smitten with Jo that it took me years to realize what was happening. Only after a few beers and a little perspective did I understand how much I had given up. Why marry someone because they seem so perfect, only to try to change them? Even my friends and family became issues for Jo. Too uneducated, drank too much, or simply too loud and crude for her taste. She seemed proud of how well she could control our lives and everything within them. There was no limit to it. Earn more, work more, endless lists of tasks. It had all become second nature to her. In the beginning, things were different. She was caring, attentive, and laid back when we first started dating. There were a few subtle signs she might be high maintenance, but nothing that raised any red flags, and I was absolutely captivated by her. Joanna Farrington Hall, née Farrington. There was no way she'd ever drop her maiden name, was a stunning woman from a wealthy family. Me? Phil Hall, not exactly stunning and certainly less wealthy, but I was doing all right. I had a good job, decent income, lots of friends and hobbies. Life was good, and then I met Jo, and it got even better. Standing at 5 feet 9 inches with long, straight blonde hair, fair skin, and a classic English elegance, Jo turned heads. Her blue eyes were as vibrant as her personality, always moving with an intense gaze. She was smart, determined, and very aware of her effect on most men, but skillfully brushed off any unwelcome attention. No one was more surprised than I was when she asked me out. I couldn't figure it out. She was clearly out of my league, and I told her so. I'm fed up with all the rich, arrogant jerks who mess me around. You seem different, maybe kinder, and I always see you laughing and joking with your friends. I like that. You'll be calling me a nice guy next. That's not much of a reason for a date. She laughed, and that smile and eye contact got me. I couldn't resist her, and she knew it. She literally took my breath away. I had to concentrate on my breathing, and it felt like my heart might burst out of my chest. Despite my doubts and how early it was, I started to think things might just work out. Jo was not only gorgeous, but great company. She invested in her looks, dressed in designer clothes, worked with a personal trainer, and enjoyed spa and beauty treatments. No expense spared. And it paid off. She only looked better with time. Our engagement was going smoothly until an incident involving an old family friend, Jo, and her ex, Richard Askew. I happened to catch Jo having a drink with him. They looked quite close, and he was holding her hands across the table. Initially, I considered leaving, but then I thought, screw it, and walked over, seating myself right next to them. Well, isn't this cozy? I said. Jo's eyes widened, and she quickly pulled her hands back. It's not what you think, she said. I was explaining to Richard that we're engaged now, and I couldn't go out with him anymore. Oh, so it's just the hand-holding and the loving looks that threw me off? Or maybe you were planning to break things off with me first? No, I swear, Richard is just a friend now. I needed to explain things face to face, the right way. I love you and want to marry you. I turned to Richard. And what do you have to say for yourself? He didn't seem in any hurry to respond. cocky guy. Joanna's telling the truth. I asked her out, not realizing she was engaged. I respect her decision and appreciate her telling me in person. I have no intention of coming between you two. His words made sense, but something about him didn't sit right with me. He went on, I'll leave you two to sort things out. Honestly, I wish you both the best. And Phil, you've got a 1 in a million girl. You're a very lucky man. Joe looked at me. I'm sorry. I should have told you I was meeting him. Are you being honest with me, Joe? If I'm not what you want, better we work this out now. You're the only one I want. Really, you have nothing to worry about. I'm all yours. Joe was eager to make it up to me later, and I wasn't about to complain. In fact, I might have played up my worries a bit, enjoying the way she was showing me how much she cared. A week before our wedding, I was starting to feel a little worn out from constantly hearing that I was the lucky one in our relationship. Only my mom seemed to think Joe was fortunate too. It wasn't really the comments that bothered me. It was how much Joe seemed to enjoy them. I had hoped for a little support or defense from her, maybe a hint that she thought she was equally lucky or that I was a good guy. But that never really came. Our conversations grew more one-sided, often revolving around her. At first, I chalked it up to wedding stress, but a lot of that stress was self-imposed. My suggestion of a small gathering with close friends had been flatly rejected. The wedding plans spiraled far beyond our original vision and budget. She insisted on the perfect dress, the perfect venue, the cake, the ring, and even invited her second cousins, which brought our guest list close to 270. Somewhere in the middle of it all, I felt overlooked, often instructed, mostly ignored. I found myself wondering if anyone would even notice if I didn't show up, and questioning once more why she was marrying me. Despite my doubts, I showed up, and the wedding went smoothly, until the speeches. Her father's speech felt more like a lecture aimed at me, outlining how I needed to keep his princess in the lifestyle she was used to. Her mum was all smiles. I definitely wasn't. So much for a welcoming, joining the family message. Joe noticed the look on my face and stood up beside me. And I'd like to toast the joining of our two wonderful families through the love Phil and I share, she said, shooting her father a pointed look as she sat back down. At least I wasn't the only one sensing the disapproval. The rest of the day went on without a hitch. After a whirlwind honeymoon, we settled into married life, and our first and, as it turned out, only child, Jade, arrived 18 months later. She was an absolute wonder to me. Joe struggled with postpartum depression and was adamant that she would never go through the trauma of childbirth again. She declared that Jade would be our one and only child. Joe knew I had always wanted more kids, but I chose not to push the conversation since she was finding motherhood difficult. I took on as much of the caregiving as I could. When Jade turned 8, Joe decided she wanted to return to work. Her father, who was well connected, secured her a job in fundraising for a charity. It wasn't until later that I learned the charity's chief executive was a man named Richard Askew. She had been working there for over a year when I, along with other partners and families, was invited to their summer social event. That year, it had a medieval theme, with reenactments, games, and events to raise funds for the charity. Most people wore costumes, with knights and ladies-in-waiting being popular choices. I opted out, to Joe's frustration. She had bought a Lady of the Manor outfit, complete with an embroidered tunic, velvet headdress, caul, and silk veil. The day featured all sorts of games, mock melees with foam weapons and electronic sensors, log battles above water, and an archery contest. Richard won the mock jousting tournament, one of only 4 people skilled enough to compete. They used foam lances, which were still pretty heavy, and managed a few hits on the electronic shield sensors, even dismounting one participant, though he looked like he was falling anyway. It was all good fun. Then, in front of everyone, Richard rode up to Jo and asked for her favor. She removed her veil, tied it to his lance, and received a round of applause. After that, she openly flirted with him in front of me. I was unhappy with how much time Jo was spending with her boss and decided to confront her. "What the hell are you doing?" She laughed. "Why, I don't know. The young knight has won my favor." "It's not funny, Jo." "Oh, come on, Phil. Aren't you going to fight for your damsel in distress, save her from the disreputable young rogue?" "I shouldn't have to, and you don't look distressed at all. Quite the opposite, in fact. You're enjoying it. We're married, and I thought we were committed to each other." "Relax, it's just a joke." "Is it? You're all over each other. Makes me wonder what else might be going on at work." With that, I stormed off. If I was hoping she'd follow me, I was sadly mistaken. I left the venue, realizing I had no idea where to go. When in doubt, find a pub. I spotted one called the Farmer's Rest and decided it would do nicely. As I sat in the bar, still processing everything over my first drink, by the second, I began to wonder if my reaction had been too intense. But it was because of him, Richard Askew, always in the picture somehow. I thought about what to say to Jo when I got home, but as it turned out, I didn't need to worry. Jo wasn't there, and a sense of unease filled me as my messages went unanswered. She returned after midnight, silent and keeping her distance. I chose not to press her about where she had been. It wasn't until lunch the next day that we gave each other a guarded acknowledgement. Then, that evening, Jo announced that we needed to talk. I couldn't help but laugh. "Why are you laughing?" she asked. "Oh, nothing. It's just that those 4 words often precede something serious." Jo ignored my comment and continued, "No one, including you, has the right to control me. I'll be honest, I've reconnected with Richard a bit since we started working together." I didn't expect that. "Are you saying there's something more?" She took a breath and replied, "Look, we've known each other for a long time, and yes, there's still a connection." "So you're saying there's a new relationship developing?" "Stop twisting my words. I'm just admitting there's mutual respect and history." I simply looked at her, shocked. "You left me alone at the charity event. He was there to support me when you weren't." I sighed. "It's like you're shifting responsibility. I had no part in this. If you hadn't walked away, none of this would have happened." "Oh, I think it would have, Jo. You're taking this lightly, as if it's something I should just accept." She looked away and said, "I'm not planning on ending things with you. I still love you." "Then what is it, Jo? Are we just moving on as if nothing happened?" "I didn't want this to get out of hand. I'm sorry, all right?" "Sorry doesn't cover it. But why are you telling me now?" "I wanted to be transparent and see if we could resolve this. To me, it feels more like you're justifying it." "All right. Let's start by discussing how we're moving forward. We're not splitting up over this one issue. You have to know that I'm committed to making this work if you still are. Then it's time we set some real boundaries and talk about what's next, because I need assurance and respect moving forward." I weighed the consequences of divorce. It was a nightmare. Even if I got joint custody, I'd be completely broke, living in a cramped space, hopefully one with actual walls. I had no idea about the lawyers. Before I knew it, her dad's firm had us in counseling. These days, it seems no one can make a decision without bringing in a therapist or a lawyer or both. Heaven forbid anyone just thinks for themselves. And another thing, why am I the one moving out when you're the one who had the affair? It wasn't an affair. I needed time to find myself and figure out what I really wanted. Find yourself? Really, I thought the problem was Richard finding you with your legs spread. That's not helpful, Mr. Hall. Dr. Taylor allowed a slight frown to break her usual composure. Joe cut into the pause. It's not that. I want you, but I'm not sure if you can move past this. I don't want to be apologizing for the next 40 years. Have you even apologized? I've heard you say sorry, but not once have you said it convincingly. Grow up. I said sorry, and we need to move forward. There's been no genuine remorse or recognition of how it affected me. If you're sorry, it's for yourself, that you didn't meet your own standards, embarrassed that Joanna Farrington Hall cheated. You're not thinking about me except to lay down the terms for staying together. You just want to act like a victim because I hurt your pride. That might be part of it. Your cheating hurt me deeply. But it's more than that. I can't get over the fact that the person who's supposed to care for me doesn't really seem to. It was just once, for God's sake. It didn't mean anything. I was angry with you. Fantastic. You threw us away for something meaningless. That's worse. And how do I know it was only once? You could have been seeing him for months. How dare you? If you can't trust me, then we're done, and we might as well end this. Actually, that's a good point. It's the first thing you've said that makes sense. What? You can't be serious. I got up to leave. What are you doing? Don't you dare walk out on me. It's still about control for you, isn't it? Well, you don't control me. I'm free to leave this room and free to leave you. Phil, don't you dare walk out. Phil! After missing my last counseling session, I was half expecting Dr. Taylor's call. Mr. Hall, I'm just checking in about today's session. I won't be returning, Doctor. Taylor A. Pause followed. Mr. Hall, Phil, speaking off the record, there are certain dynamics in your wife's personality that you should be cautious of. You mean beyond the issues we've discussed? She has some traits that may make it challenging to find understanding. You might want to read up on healthy co-parenting approaches. It's worth looking into. The call ended abruptly, and after some research, I realized some of the traits described fit Joe's personality. The need for attention, occasional criticisms, and her strong sense of independence. For the first time, I realized I might be at risk of missing out on a close relationship with Jade, my daughter. I couldn't allow anything to come between us. Healthy co-parenting was my focus. I wanted to be there for Jade long term. But I couldn't help thinking, how could I make sure we both had stability? None of the typical options seemed realistic. I wasn't an expert or someone with high-level connections. I was just a regular guy navigating family life. Was there any way to hold on to what was most important? Then an idea crossed my mind. Maybe I could co-parent Jade while staying on good terms with Joe. She was almost 10 now. Maybe I could keep things stable for a few more years. It didn't have to be about romance. A practical approach could work. Financially, it'd be smarter, and by keeping things civil, I could stay close to Jade. Joe had asked for another conversation, hoping to clear the air, and I agreed, on the condition she wouldn't interfere with my time with Jade. She denied having done so and promised no more issues, so I decided to meet. Let's talk openly. I've always needed a bit more in life. If it hadn't been Richard, maybe it would have been something else eventually. Then why marry me? You know why. I love you. You're my stability, my source of happiness. I'm a social person. I like energy and attention. I need you. But maybe I just needed a little more sometimes. And Richard was that more? Not exactly. He's different, but I can let that go if it bothers you. If you leave, though, I know he'll always want to be here for me. Wow, that's honest. Maybe you two do have some understanding. It doesn't have to end for us. I'm still here. You won't find anyone else who knows you like I do. But you want to see others? Please, no need to say it like that. Being with Richard reminded me of what I'd been missing. I wish I'd been more honest with you, but I was afraid of losing you. It doesn't have to be something I pursue often, and I can keep things private. We sat in silence, the weight of the future heavy in the air. Divorce loomed as an option. I might consider giving things another shot if we opened up the relationship." Joe looked surprised before a smile appeared. "Sure, if it's something you want, maybe it could work." "That's not exactly what I meant. I wouldn't want to know details. I'd want us to consider a different setup if that's the path we choose." "Why? I'm all you need." "Maybe it's about balance. Think of it this way. You'd get the attention you seem to enjoy." She glanced down, a small smile on her face. "But you don't need anyone else. You have everything right here." Joe loved admiration, and I knew this well. "Imagine all those people who'd be thrilled to know someone as amazing as you. You'd be the center of attention." I could tell she was intrigued by the idea, perhaps even more than by her usual need for control, so I pressed forward with my bold proposal. "That's the only way we make this work, and there are a few more conditions. You'll need a health checkup before we move forward, and all boundaries will be clear. No solo ventures without discussing them first, and we'll connect with others in a way that keeps everything transparent. One last thing. Let's not see Richard again. Honestly, I'm not a fan." Joe reacted with frustration, making a big fuss and even accusing me of having hidden motives. I managed to keep a straight face, knowing she wouldn't see the irony, and asked if she'd made any changes at work yet. "This isn't a negotiation, Joe. It's this, or we go our separate ways." She reluctantly agreed, realizing I was serious, though I had a feeling she thought she'd eventually find a way around it. She did leave her position, saying her father had found her a new role and promised to avoid further contact with Richard. I wasn't completely convinced, but it was a step I hadn't expected her to take so easily. We joined a few social sites for meeting new people and were surprised by the number of responses. Joe's picture in a classy evening outfit attracted a lot of attention from a range of people. After some messaging, we met a couple, Dave and Gail, who were a bit younger than us, both fit and friendly. Dave seemed particularly interested in Joe, but I didn't feel much of a connection with Gail, so we ended the evening without making plans for more, to Joe's disappointment. From then on, I started selecting people to meet based on their profiles, not focusing too much on Joe's preferences. We'd meet up once a month or so, sometimes just to socialize. Generally, everyone was friendly, and the group varied in age, offering different perspectives and personalities. Joe enjoyed the attention, and it helped us find a new balance in our relationship. In our everyday life, Joe's attitude improved. She complained less, understanding I'd leave if things reverted to the old patterns, and we found a cautious truce. Meanwhile, I spent more time with Jade, who was in her teens and often clashed with her mom. I quietly built a stronger bond with her, appreciating its importance. Practically speaking, staying together was more affordable, and I couldn't imagine handling everything on my own, from cooking to finances. I'd met people through this arrangement I never would have encountered otherwise, and while it wasn't what I'd imagined originally, it seemed like a workable compromise. I didn't feel the same way about Joe as I once had, but we maintained a functional relationship. Occasionally, I missed a deeper connection, but Joe and I had reached an understanding. Jade was now 13, and I just needed to keep things stable for a few more years. Then I began chatting with a couple, Megan and Ian, in their early 30s. Our conversation was natural and friendly, and we eventually exchanged a few casual photos. Megan had a warm smile, curly red hair, and a down-to-earth vibe, while Ian was friendly and personable. We decided to meet at a restaurant to see how things felt. Joe chose a fitted black dress that showed off her figure. I was a bit surprised by her choice and suggested it was a bit bold, but she just laughed and said she wanted to make a good impression since Ian was so tall. We stepped into the elegant bar and spotted them in a quiet booth, laughing and greeting each other like old friends, even hugging. Ian was dressed in a sharp suit, making my jeans and dress shirt feel out of place. Seeing Megan in person was breathtaking. A computer screen hadn't done her justice. She wore a midnight blue dress that seemed to shimmer in the lights, tasteful and modest, paired with mid-height heels. Her highlighted red hair was styled in a mass of curls and pins, yet looked completely natural. Maybe Joe had been right about dressing up. There were warm smiles all around and lots of "great to finally meet you" sentiments, followed by small talk about finding the place. We ordered a couple of bottles of wine, and while I tried not to stare too obviously at Megan, Ian was less subtle about admiring Joe. The conversation flowed easily. Everyone admitted they'd hardly thought of anything else all week. I can't believe how well everyone's getting along. This is way more relaxed than I thought it would be. It feels like we've been friends forever. The last thing we needed was for you guys to be uptight. Everyone agreed, and I noticed Joe looking at Ian with clear admiration. For someone who hadn't seemed into this idea, she was now fully in flirt mode. Megan was biting her lip, a nervous habit, but it only highlighted her full lips, catching my attention. A dance floor lay between the bar and restaurant, with soft music playing in the background. I asked Megan if she'd like to dance, and she glanced at Ian, who nodded in encouragement. Ian also stood and offered Joe his hand, and she took it, barely glancing my way. I was very aware of our first touch as Megan took my hand, her gaze meeting mine. My heart skipped a beat, and I gently placed my other hand on her waist. "Does that feel all right?" Megan smiled and nodded as we started moving slowly to the music. She seemed nervous, so I kept up the small talk. "I really love your dress. It's very elegant." "Thanks. I hoped you would. Took me ages to choose, trying for intimacy but not trashy, you know." "Well, I'd say you nailed it. You look elegant and classy." Megan surprised me by sharing that this was the first time she had experienced something like this. Her interest had sparked after a reunion with old college friends, where everyone was just enjoying each other's company. Ian had encouraged Megan to explore new experiences, and she agreed. I sensed there might be more behind it, but I didn't want to dig too deeply just yet. "Would you mind if I held you closer, Megan?" "That's fine, and you can call me Meg. Everyone else does." "All right. Why not try putting your hands on my shoulders?" As she did, I wrapped my arms around her. "How does that feel?" "It's nice, Phil. I like being close to you." I noticed her bite her lip in a shy way. "Just try to relax, Meg. I won't do anything you're uncomfortable with. If I do, just let me know and we'll work it out." "Thanks, Phil. That means a lot. I want to trust you, and this feels like a perfect start to something special, I hope." I held her close, letting myself forget about Joe and Ian for a moment. I felt the urge to kiss her, but decided to wait, something worth anticipating. We glanced over and saw Ian and Joe sharing a moment, and surprisingly, I felt calm. The issues between Joe and me felt more distant. Meg looked up at me. "How do you feel seeing them together?" I thought I'd feel jealous, but I don't. "I think it's because you're here with me." Meg smiled back. "You're so sweet. Honestly, that was what I was most worried about all week. I was always comfortable with you, but I thought seeing them would be harder. It isn't. It actually feels like a normal date, which I like, with just a bit of added excitement. More than a bit. I feel the same. I'm good with it as long as we're together." I pulled her a little closer, enjoying the nearness. We continued to almost dance. Ian and Joe walked over. "Are you guys okay?" Meg answered, "Yeah, we're doing great." "You two make a great-looking couple." Hearing that made me feel proud. I liked us being thought of as a couple. Meg turned to me. "I couldn't agree more. I think we do too." We settled back into our booth while Ian and Joe continued dancing. I leaned in to talk to Meg over the music, our faces close in the dim light. She leaned forward and kissed me softly. The feeling was warm, and her perfume was captivating. It felt electric, like the thrill of a first high school kiss. We shared a quiet moment, absorbed in each other, with everything else fading away. Her gentle responses drew me in deeper, and I couldn't help but feel closer to her. "That was amazing," I said. "Thank you, and just so you know, there's no rush. We can go at a pace that feels right for you, no need to keep up with anyone else." "I know," she replied, smiling. "We'll just follow our own rhythm." We looked over to see Joe watching us, with Ian mouthing, "Wow!" Meg noticed and blushed, pressing her face against my chest. From the muffled embrace, she murmured, "Guess they saw us, huh?" "Looks like it. We got a bit carried away. Does that make you feel awkward?" "Not at all, does it make you?" "Not even a little," I replied. "And I don't want to let you go." Ian and Joe rejoined us, and we slipped into a relaxed conversation about friends, family, travel, and work. Time flew by, highlighting how much we had in common. After a short silence, Ian suggested, "How about a nightcap back at ours? Or we can always save it for another time if that feels too soon." Joe looked eager. I glanced at Meg, who smiled and nodded, saying, "Sure, let's go back and see how things go. No promises, though." "Sounds good," I replied. "We can go with the flow." Joe laughed. "Why don't we switch up partners for the drive, just to keep everyone together?" "Perfect idea," I agreed, feeling excited about the night ahead. I took Meg's hand as we walked out of the bar, a mix of anticipation and nerves bubbling up. Joe and Ian followed closely behind, arms linked. The waitress noticed and gave us a knowing smile. At the car, I opened the door for Meg, feeling both exhilarated and a bit shy as I took a moment to appreciate her presence. Once the engine was running, we pulled away, and I saw Ian's car following. "Are you having a good time tonight, Meg?" "Yes, it's been wonderful. More relaxed than I'd expected, though I'm still a bit nervous." "I'd say you don't need to be, but I feel it too. You're amazing to be around. Just remember, we're taking things at a comfortable pace." She smiled, reached over, and squeezed my hand. "Thanks, that helps. You're making it easy. I had so many doubts. And it looks like Ian and Joe are hitting it off too." After a short drive, we arrived at their place, poured some wine around the kitchen counter, and settled into the lounge. I was happy when Meg chose to sit beside me. We chatted for a while, and I couldn't help but notice how captivating she was. I glanced over and saw Ian sharing a sweet moment with Joe, so I decided to take a chance with Meg, and soon we were sharing a kiss. After a while, Ian suggested, "How about breakfast at 9 a.m.? A thrilling thought. The idea of spending time together beyond that evening had me excited. I agreed, and so did Meg with a gentle nod. We continued to kiss, growing more connected, but then she pulled back, looking slightly hesitant. "You're a good guy, but I'm just not sure I can go through with this." Though it stung a bit, I told her, "It's all right, Meg. You need to feel comfortable and sure. This has to be what you truly want." A moment later, we heard a sound from upstairs, and she took a deep breath before reaching out for my hand and leading me up the stairs. We passed one of the bedrooms, and it was clear what was happening inside. Meg led me to the master bedroom, where she shyly began to unbutton her dress. She looked beautiful and confident, and I couldn't help but smile, feeling genuinely lucky to share this moment. We enjoyed the evening, sharing tender moments and getting lost in each other's company. Meg had this quiet, captivating side, and it was thrilling to see it come alive. We spent time connecting deeply, enjoying the moment for what it was. Our time together was genuine and unforgettable, and as we drifted off to sleep, I realized I wanted to know her even better. She wasn't just the shy person I'd first met. She had a spark that made the evening feel magical. By morning, I felt closer to her, not just for what happened, but because of who she truly was beneath the surface. We were startled awake by the sound of movement next door. It was clear Ian and Joe were enjoying each other's company. The unexpected moment stirred a reaction in me, and Meg seemed more than happy to receive similar attention. Breakfast that morning flowed with comfortable conversation, and after the initial awkwardness faded, we all shared our perspectives in a light-hearted way. It was clear everyone had enjoyed themselves, and we agreed to meet again. Over the next 6 months, our connections with Ian and Meg continued to deepen, and I genuinely enjoyed each gathering. Joe started to wonder if my feelings for Meg were growing, but I reassured her it was simply a friendly arrangement. Eventually, Ian decided it was time to part ways, feeling that Meg and I had gotten too close. I couldn't deny it. I had developed feelings for her. Looking back, that moment marked the end of our gatherings. 4 months had passed since our last meeting when, unexpectedly, Joe mentioned that Ian and Meg had invited us to a social gathering. Apparently, it was a private event hosted by a couple they met online. Ian and Meg were feeling a bit uncertain about it and wanted us there as backup in case things got uncomfortable. These types of parties weren't usually our scene, and we had our boundaries clearly set. We only participated in activities that both of us agreed on. But curious to see Meg again, I agreed to go. Joe seemed especially enthusiastic, saying she was interested in the new experience and thought it could open the door to new adventures. When we arrived at the venue, I was pleasantly surprised to find it was a spacious, secluded private residence. The atmosphere was relaxed, with drinks and friendly introductions. The hosts welcomed us and introduced us to a few regulars, who all seemed like friendly people, though Ian and Meg weren't there yet. Joe soon started chatting with a guy named Jeff. He was young and friendly, and Joe seemed quite taken by him. They headed to the bar area together while I stayed with the hosts and met another couple. About 20 or 30 minutes later, Joe returned, saying she was going to spend more time with Jeff. Wait a second. Remember our boundaries. We only connect with other couples, nothing outside of that. But it's just a social event, she replied. Even so, we stick to our boundaries. She seemed a bit annoyed, and I wondered if she might go anyway, but then I noticed a small shake of her head toward Jeff across the room. She had settled down a bit by the time Ian and Meg arrived. I immediately noticed Meg's outfit. It was eye-catching, stylish, but different from her usual style. She looked amazing, though she seemed a bit uncomfortable. Ian was his usual lively self, but Meg looked a bit withdrawn. I guessed it might just be the setting. Maybe not her thing or mine, really. Before long, Ian took Joe back to the bar, leaving me with Meg. We chatted, but she seemed distracted, and our conversation felt a little strained compared to our usual warmth. Do you want to step outside? We could go for a quick drive to get some fresh air. Her face lit up with relief, and suddenly she became emotional. I tried to comfort her, asking what was wrong. Ian's been encouraging me to try something new, and I'm not comfortable with it. I only agreed to come because he said you would be here. I knew you'd understand. Wait, why would Ian invite me if he knew I'd support your comfort over pushing boundaries? We both realized it at the same moment, but Meg voiced it first. Maybe he wanted Joe's support. They've been in touch to plan things out. We went looking for them, but they weren't in the bar. Shaking my head at Meg, I checked my watch. It had already been at least 45 minutes since they'd left together. I hurried up the stairs and moved down the hallway just as Joe stumbled out of a bedroom door, struggling to pull her dress down as we nearly ran into each other. The door was ajar, and I could see Ian and Jeff inside. Then, a bit of liquid dropped to the floor between her legs, and at least she had the grace to look embarrassed. I glared at her angrily. So is that my fault too, Joe? It's my body, and I'll do exactly what I want with it. Suit yourself, but I'm leaving. I spun around, sidestepping Meg on the stairs, heading straight for the door. I heard the sound of heels following me down the stairs and across the tiled hall. When I turned around, ready to tell Jo exactly where she could go, I found Meg standing there instead. She looked distressed, eyes wide. "Can I come with you?" I glanced back at the landing, watching a third man guide Jo back into the bedroom with the others. I gave Meg a nod and turned to leave. The car ride was quiet. We chatted briefly about what we would do next, concluding that both Ian and Jo were too self-centered. As for Jo, I realized she'd always be trying to come out on top, refusing to find any balance in our relationship. Meg's take was more direct. "Ian's just a jerk." That made me laugh, a kind of personality insight I could actually relate to without needing a therapist. "Want me to drop you off at home? I'm not really in the mood for company." "Only if you're sure you'll be all right alone, and if you could drop me at my mom's instead. I don't want to run into Ian anytime soon." I promised to keep in touch after dropping her off, then returned to my home alone, keenly aware of the quiet and darkness that awaited me. Jo came back home the next day, and I couldn't tell if she was going to start an argument or offer an apology. "Don't even try, Jo. This is the end for us." "Why? It's not like it means anything. We've both had other relationships, so why does this matter?" I'd had enough. 3 times and you're out all night. It feels like you're trying to prove a point that you could always find someone else. And you're right. You're attractive and there's no shortage of attention. Congratulations. She almost looked like she wanted to laugh. But that was irresponsible. You could have put us both at risk. You don't know if they're careful. You should consider yourself lucky if you've avoided anything. Her face turned serious. "Have you ever not been careful before? I need you to be honest." No, that was the first time." "I'm sorry. I just felt hurt when my plans with Jeff got ruined." "That's ridiculous. You had all this planned. You even distracted me with Megan so that you and Ian could get what you wanted. This is a pattern with you. It's like you're always reaching for something more. I think it's best if you get things checked out because I'm not going near you again." Jo didn't handle my leaving well. She began interfering in my life and made it challenging for me to see Jade. She even showed up at my parents' house where I was staying, confronting me about the way I'd handled things. I was trying to keep things as calm as possible. Thankfully, my mom stepped in firmly, asking Jo to leave, saying, "You need some space, Jo." This didn't go over well, and Jo expressed her frustration strongly. Even though I was supporting Jade financially, Jo involved the child support agency. Ironically, they determined I should actually be contributing less. Upset, she reacted sharply, which led to her receiving a formal warning. Another time, I went to pick up Jade, only for Jo to say she was staying with a friend. Then, unexpectedly, Richard walked into the room, looking very self-assured. I asked, "What's going on?" Jo responded with a smirk, saying, "Remember when I told you Richard would be here if you left? Well, here he is." At that moment, I suspected Jo might be trying to provoke me, recalling some old advice about staying calm in tense situations. I decided it wasn't worth engaging. Then Jo added, "Richard's been really supportive. He'd even consider being a role model for Jade." Glancing around, I noticed her phone on the shelf, and it looked like she might be recording everything. I just shook my head. "Nice try, Jo. I'm not playing along. By the way, Richard, you might want to know a bit more about Jo's social life." Richard looked surprised. As I left, I simply said, "Take care of yourselves." I received a series of heated messages and even a video call while Jo was with someone else. Her comments were surprising. "Look at what you've given up. You could still be with me instead of being alone at home. Anyway, I have a new partner now who's just better." I found it odd that she had time to send messages if everything was supposedly going so well. At that point, I was only focused on keeping Jade safe. "If you let me keep Jade, you'll have more freedom to do whatever you want." she added before ending the call, likely taken aback that two people had now distanced themselves from her. The divorce process was tough, dragging on as she disputed every detail, making up stories about me being unfaithful and hurtful. These claims were unfounded, and eventually those involved in the case began to see things clearly. Anyone who disagreed with her was met with strong words. I started to realize that the Joe I once knew was not the full picture. Even her family grew concerned about her unpredictable behavior, but in her view, that was somehow my fault for leaving. When Jade, now 14, was finally allowed to express her choice, the court respected her decision. She wanted to stay with me, as I'd been consistent, attending all her events and activities. Joe saw this as a betrayal. During the custody hearing, my lawyer requested a psychological assessment of Joe for Jade's well-being, which caused a strong reaction. In court, she voiced her frustrations openly, even towards the judge and my attorney. She was warned multiple times about her behavior. I'd kept records and texts as evidence. At the final hearing, when the judge awarded joint custody, she expressed her frustration again, resulting in another warning and a fine. Over time, I found myself spending more and more time with Jade. Joe seemed to lose interest in both parenting and Jade's so-called bad attitude, though I never saw any sign of it myself. With only 18 months left to pay on the mortgage, we'd soon be able to sell, or Joe would have to buy me out. I'd also been discreetly setting aside small amounts of money over the years, which helped a lot. The day after I got my divorce confirmation, the doorbell rang. I opened it to see a woman with vibrant curly red hair. "Hi. Would you be interested in dating a recent divorcee and reformed swinger who's looking to settle down with the right strictly monogamous man? I think you might find someone like that inside, if you'd like to come in." The truth was, I'd stayed in touch with Meg, and we'd supported each other through both our divorces. Ian, much like Joe, seemed to live for parties and would occasionally beg forgiveness only to revert to the same old ways. After that, I saw Joe infrequently, just a brief appearance at Jade's 16th birthday. I thought that maybe, after all this time, we could have a reasonable conversation. "I'd consider taking you back, Phil, if you begged," she said. "You know I'm the best thing you ever had. Don't even try pretending you don't miss me." As I walked away, I replied, "You're right, Joe. It would be completely pointless to say otherwise." The next time I saw her was at the train station as we sent Jade off to university. I was there with Meg. As the train pulled away, I overheard Joe say, "I could take him from you if I really wanted to, but I'm enjoying all the other men too much, and his ego couldn't handle that." Meg smiled sweetly. "Oh dear, you really are so bitter and entirely delusional, aren't you?" Meg turned and took my arm as we walked away together. Jade would come back to us on every vacation, partly because she adored her half-brother, and indeed we truly did live happily ever after,